Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the UBC Learning Circle, hosted by the Center for Excellence in Indigenous Health. We are very pleased today to be joined by Jeska Slater from IndigenEYEZ to continue our series on connections. Jeska is going to talk to us about connecting to others today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional, ancestral, unceded, and occupied territories of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam people. I would also like to acknowledge the First Nations Health Authority for generously funding the UBC Learning Circle. As a gentle reminder today, for everybody participating, the topics we cover can sometimes be sensitive or emotionally triggering. If you feel the need to talk to someone, a friend or an elder, a counselor or a relative, please don't hesitate to do so. Make sure that you're engaging in self-care whenever needed. So, on to introductions. My name is Cole. I'm from the Chawatho First Nation, and I will be facilitating the discussion today. Other Learning Circle team members in the room but off camera are Cynthia, our production coordinator, and Jordan, our assistant coordinator. So with that, I think I'll let you introduce yourself, Jeska. Please take it away.
Great. Tansei, everyone out there. Thanks for having me today. My name is Jeska Slater. My Cree name is Wapske Pasquamis Dosisqueo, which means White Buffalo Woman. My mom is from Fisher River Cree Nation in Manitoba. My dad is English, but I was raised in Katzie territory. And I've been working with IndigenEYEZ now for a few years, and it was just brought on this year officially as the Vancouver Hub Coordinator.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's really exciting. And then my background is I've been developing programs with youth for 10 years, mostly around positive identity development, decolonization, and returning to traditional values.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
Cool stuff.
So connecting to others, this is part of a larger series with IndigenEYEZ, and I was fortunate to actually be able to facilitate this module out in Stalo territory last week, and it's been a really incredible series. So the series was setting the foundation, connecting to self, connecting to others, and then into the community. And so it's been a really interesting succession, I guess, to see how everything is interrelated and how as in terms of decolonizing, connecting to others is a really big topic. So it's been really interesting to work with this module. So all these images are done by folks that we've worked with before. This is the photographer is Kelsey Marchand of Sioch Images, and I find it nice to have a visual.
Yeah.
That's why you're not just looking at me talking the whole time. So I guess to start off, I really want to acknowledge that this work that we're engaged in starts from generations before us. It's very much been a journey of mine to learn about connecting to others in healthy ways throughout my lifespan. And it's included my whole family, it's included my closest relationships, and I really take a lot of time to give honor and thanks to my grandma and my aunties for modeling healthy relationships despite what they had been through. And I also really like this photo because I think pre-contact, a lot of the child raising and education fell on our elders. And I feel like this has been one of the impacts of colonization that not only affect our children, but affect our elders as well. So I know pre-contact elders had such a significant role in being our libraries, the glue that basically held our communities together, and then also the ones that educated our children. So we are really, in a lot of our initiatives, trying to create space for those relationships to develop again. And it's really interesting to hear both from elders and young people that they want mentorship. They want to be able to have the opportunity to mentor, and young people want to be mentored. And so that's one of the ways that we're trying to address that in our programs. So I think for us, like, if we're talking about connecting to others in our lifetime, our formative relationships when we're children will impact how we connect with others our entire lifespan. So we are looking from a systemic level at how the impacts of colonization affect our ability to connect to others. And I think it starts, as a child, because in a lot of our homes, we grew up with addiction. And when you grow up in a house with addiction, you learn not to speak, not to be seen or heard, to as like kind of a way to protect yourself. And I think that these patterns really show up in the rest of our lives. So at IndigenEYEZ, what we try to do is build a safe container to allow vulnerability to be able to look at how our early life is impacting our way to connect to others now.
Okay.
And yeah, so that container is a really important starting point, I think, to be able to do this work. For me personally, as a child, I always knew that something was missing, being in a nuclear family structure. And we were really fortunate in a lot of ways because we could pass as white. So that offered my family privileges that a lot of my other family didn't have, and a lot of the young people today I work with don't have. So my mom, I think that they kind of pretended that they weren't Cree because back in the day in the 50s in Manitoba, segregation was so severe. And they compared it almost to the U.S., how the segregation happened down there. Because my mom was the fairest one, and she was the only one allowed into the church, into the grocery store, into the certain parts of the community. So I think those formative times for her and for my uncles really impacted the way that they connected to people. And, some of the impacts that we experience of colonization, like growing up in houses with addiction, is that we also learn not to speak, like not to be heard, but also to not feel. And like that feeling isn't safe.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I love the work of Dr. Lee Brown too, because he talks about how pre-contact emotional intelligence was such a huge part of our traditional value systems and teachings. And through that, like being frozen, I think that's really impacted our ability to have healthy relationships and to connect to others in a safe way. So for me, like personally, looking at my family's history, what they had to endure, our history, and then, my brother and I's history, and then relearning how to connect to others has been a really big journey for us, but it's been incredibly rewarding, and I'm just so grateful every day that my family is healthy and supportive and really looking to reintegrate our traditional value systems into our family structure. Yeah. Because I think that if we are looking at decolonizing our families or decolonizing our ways to connect, it starts with looking at how the impacts of colonization have affected our families.
Totally, yeah.
Oh, oops. So, yeah, it's really interesting. I really also love the work of Dr. Jan Derrick. She does a workshop called The Circle in the Box, where experientially you model the way that our communities were formed pre-contact.
Okay.
So it's an experiential workshop where you can kind of see how everything was situated, and then they compare that with the way that Western it's a comparison between Western worldview and Indigenous worldview at the time of contact.
Okay.
But you act it out. So in that, in the Indigenous formations, at the center you would have spirit, and then next would be the children. So the children would be the second hoop.
Okay.
And the children were all really connected with each other. And then the third hoop is the mothers. Two-spirit men, and then elders are the glue that hold the whole community together.
Right.
And what I really loved about putting people in these formations is that you feel how interconnected and symbiotic our communities were. So when a mother gets sick, for instance, the other mothers kind of come around and still look after the children. There's a continuum of care that isn't broken. And there's no like removal, of children from community. It's all very much like almost like one living being. And that really connects to Kelly Terbasket's teachings that she shares about sharing one's skin. They have a word in Tsielchen that's about like being in one membrane, being in one skin, and that activity really reminds me of that. So I think one of the biggest impacts of colonization that our communities have felt are the individualization and the separation of our families into nuclear structures, and the separation of almost like our children's community and like our children's ability to be witnessed in a healthy way by community and celebrated. And really like noticing how our children's gifts are developed and nurtured. So it's a very different system now. We're in a education system that was developed for the Industrial Revolution, and it's very different, I think, than the way that we were educated pre-contact. So again, I think that in this work, we are tasked mainly with developing safe containers now for these structures of connection to be revitalized.
Okay.
And I think that starts with our young people too, developing healthy containers for our young people to connect not only with each other, but also to mentors and to people modeling healthy relationships.
Right. Okay. Like within their community. Or,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I definitely see that our children are impacted by the behavior that we model to them. So if we're experiencing lateral violence in our communities, what is that teaching our kids? Like how to relate. And I find that like even with my child, he is so intelligent and so aware at the age of 4. I can't get anything past him. So if I'm tense, if I'm stressed, he can feel it. And I have to really monitor my own triggers, my own emotional wellness when I'm around him. And definitely I have to look at how I'm relating to other people in front of him. So, yeah, and it's been a real learning experience for me because I can see how immediately he picks up my behavior.
Right.
And I see that in community too, right? So we run a number of land-based camps, and just how when youth now come together, they kind of like band in cliques sometimes, and I think that's a mechanism to keep themselves safe. Right? Because we're not used to feeling safe like in big shared spaces like that anymore. So I think that's been a really interesting part of the work with IndigenEYEZ is not only creating safe spaces, but allowing people to show up in a really authentic way where our defense mechanisms can kind of be down a little bit.
Right.
And be able to be vulnerable and be safe. And that's been really transformational for a lot of young people that we work with. And yeah, it's been a really enjoyable part of the work for sure for us.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So also honoring our different styles of relationship that we had pre-contact too, because pre-contact, where I come from, we honored our two-spirit people as incredible knowledge keepers and almost medicine keepers because they were in a different place than most within our gender spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
So their worldview and their perspective was so special to us.
Right.
And that's been a really interesting part of this work around decolonizing for me personally in my practice, but also in the work with IndigenEYEZ, because they really work to honor each individual no matter how they're showing up. And I really love the work of my mentor, Kim Haxton. She's been on here, I guess, a couple times.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how she opens our sessions has been an incredible way to create that safe container. She'll say, you know, I want to honor how everyone is showing up here today, how I want to honor everybody's body. So whether you're slim like a willow or you're plump like a juicy berry, however you're showing up here today.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's so amazing. And she also, we've shifted now to not asking people to identify how they want their gender to be expressed, because of some places aren't safe to reveal that, right? Especially if you're in community, if you are a trans youth but maybe haven't come out yet.
Yeah.
So that was a really cool learning for me. And just like bringing back our traditional teachings around being two-spirited has been really beautiful. And I think that as a part of decolonizing, bringing back those values and teachings has been really beautiful. And then also honoring how our young people want to relate to each other in that way too. So we're stepping out of, you know, these constructs that have been placed on us through things like residential school around relating and coming back to our traditional teachings. And that isn't easy at all. Mm-hmm. And so I know, like, generationally, it's really hard for some folks to talk about, you know, the gender binaries and the diversity there, and also the diversity of the way of our youth want to relate to each other. Because I know in my work, I would say almost half of our youth don't conform to a normal relationship structure. And yeah, so that's been really beautiful to learn about and witness. And I think it's important for us too, in community, if we are learning to connect to others and to connect to young people, to learn how to have that safety for our young people to exist in the way that they want to exist. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it's wonderful, and I really like that you've brought this up just in general. If we're talking about, you know, kind of shifting perspectives from a Western to a more like traditional viewpoint, what I see fundamentally from my perspective is that within communities there was this this celebration of uniqueness.
Yes.
Within community, whereas it's the antithesis of that, in fact, in Western culture. To be unique is to be ostracized almost. Do you know what I mean? Which was the exact opposite. So when we're talking about two-spirit individuals, we celebrate them because they were so unique in our communities. Do you know what I mean? Because their perspectives were so distinct.
For sure. And I really love kind of comparing the two worldviews side by side for that ways. So if we look at, you know, some of the roots of our education systems and what they were made for, they're not really made for creativity.
Yeah.
I know there's Sir Robinson has that great TED talk about how our schools aren't really built for creativity. But I feel like our nation's pre-contact had to be, because innovation and creativity impacted our survival so much.
Right.
And then our individual gifts, you know, were identified and nurtured, so we could have the most powerful contributions to our societies.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like more about conforming into a box, right? And it's really interesting to see how that plays out socially. like in our ways to connect with people too. And if you are like weird or strange, you're kind of looked as an outsider, right? So I really like that you brought that up, because I think that speaks to our values about being inclusive and about witnessing the authenticity of each one of our community members and really honoring it. And then, coming back to like what underlying needs there might be there. So that's been a huge part of our leadership, is learning about when you're connecting with others in community and someone becomes triggered, not reacting, from a place of trigger, but just kind of looking at what is the underlying need there for that person. Like coming back into that compassionate leadership place of what's really going on there. And I think when we're talking about connecting to others, that's been one of the most powerful tools that I've learned, is about like not taking things personally, right? A lot of the time it's not about us, like when we're having a big reaction or interaction with someone. And also being able to unpack like the more systemic stuff has been really helpful to understand, why people connect the way that they do or don't connect, right? Yeah.
Cool.
So again, like just coming back to our young people, and looking at how we're modeling connection to them in community, I think is central to our work at IndigenEYEZ, but also as leaders in community. So, being able to promote lateral kindness in our organizations and like at a top-down like way is really important, because if we do that on the top of our organizations or communities, it's going to trickle down and be felt throughout the whole structure, right? Right down into our youth. And we, like, traditionally, we're not pyramidal structures, and I feel like so many of our organizations and nations are structured like that because of colonial influences. But if we are trying to decolonize and come back into that more circular, cyclical, and symbiotic framework, then either way we're doing it, it's still going to affect our young people. So if we are working with that hierarchical structure, creating policy that's going to promote lateral kindness from the top down, I think, is really important. And also having training in community about, the impacts of colonization and how we're impacted today, and how it's impacting our ability to have a healthy culture in our workplace, even, in our band offices, even. Because if we're able to do that work as adults, I think the youth are going to feel those impacts, not just through how effective our programming is, but also when they see us in community and when we're creating safe spaces for them to come into and be able to create their own connections and their own family matrices and their own ways of relating. So I feel like that's such a huge responsibility as leaders in community and as adults, that we need to be really assessing how our ways of working and our ways of being are impacting young people, and what that means.
Yeah, I think that we had a conversation on the show here with Harley Eagle a couple of weeks ago about cultural safety and how it relates to leadership. And from that, I mean, there's so many things you just touched on that kind of relate back to that session, of course. But in particular, I think modeling, that type of leadership is just so critical because of the presence of toxic leadership in the world. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
And we can't silo ourselves and pretend that our youth aren't also consuming media, aren't also on the internet, aren't also watching, certain orange guys down south, right? So we need to make sure that in community there are examples of positive, empathetic, caring leadership, right?
Definitely. And I think that our job is almost twice as hard as mainstream as in Indigenous communities, because our families have been very impacted, by these things. And so to be able to show up authentically and to lead in that empathetic way is like such an amazing feat,
Totally.
considering the history.
Yeah.
And I think a lot, I put my hands up to a lot of the leaders out there that are doing that work and modeling that work and really wanting that for their community, because it's not an easy job. But bringing our values back, from our traditional values and implementing them in the workplace, I think is a great way to start when we're talking about connecting to others. And because the way we relate in the workplace too, the policies that we create, it's going to have a ripple effect because people bring those home. All the people there are going to be influenced by that.
Yeah, of course.
And the young people in our home too. But I think that it's the most impactful work around that for me has been, again, looking at how colonization impacted my family, but not only my family, my community, and how our traditional structures of relating were disrupted, and then how we can recreate those.
Yeah.
But it's different wherever you go. It's very diverse, and every territory has their own laws about relating and kinship. So where I'm from, our sacred law is called Mio Pimatsawin, but within that, it's a very complex law system. And one of our main laws is around kinship and around relating. And the tenets of that are respect, communication, and openness. And it's really hard for my aunties and my grandma who were attending, residential school to have those values now, understandably, right? To be operating from that place, because they were taught that they wouldn't be safe if they did those things. So I think it all comes back to trauma work, really. When we're talking about relating to others in a safe and healthy way, is being able to do our own trauma work so that we can show up in a healthy way and be that healthy connection to others. Yeah.
Totally.
And that none of this is easy. So for one of the ways that
it's a beautiful picture, by the way.
Yeah, Kelsey is an amazing photographer. I love her images. So if we're looking back to returning to our authentic and powerful places, to be able to connect authentically with others, just being able to know our own selves, I think, is so key. And I know that that was one of the webinars. But knowing our own selves, knowing our own boundaries, knowing our own needs is going to really impact how we relate to others and how we connect to others. So for me, I actually went into a type of therapy called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, but it's proven to be one of the most effective ways of treating PTSD and trauma, and it's revolutionized my way to connect to other people, because I could look at things that had happened to me in my formative years that impacted the way I connect to people throughout my whole lifetime. And it was so powerful because I could see how those young experiences, it was almost like a string connecting them to other hard experiences that I had, but it really came back down to that. So that was so illuminating and powerful to me. And I think that we have access to these resources now that we need to be taking, especially through like the Intergenerational Survivors of Residential School Counseling Fund, things like that, to be able to really, dig deep at how we can connect to others, how we can, safely connect to others. And then another thing with this is having the safe spaces to connect to others. So that's been, I'm a single parent, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm working so much.
Yeah, of course.
how can I have time to have community? That's been like one of my biggest learning experiences, and learning about how social media isn't really authentic connection. It kind of seems like that in the minute.
Yeah.
But I think on a psychological level, I think there's impacts to not being able to connect face to face with people and to like have that time to spend with like family and friends. And I know Vancouver Foundation just released a study about young people in Vancouver, but this is one of the loneliest cities.
Really?
And I think that it's because as young people, there's so much pressure on us with the housing costs, with just the cost of living here is so high that we are working ourselves to the bone and then not having a lot of time or energy to connect with others. So my in my work, that's been really, I think that's why I'm in the field too, because my work is so enjoyable and it's so much about connecting to others that it's been really fulfilling that way. But on a personal level, making that space and time to have face-to-face times with the people that I love is so important for my own personal wellness. And having that network of strong women has just been like so incredible for my own success. Like I don't think I could be where I'm at right now doing what I'm doing without a really tight group of strong women. So, and I really feel and I really see the way that not having that impacts someone. So, working with a lot of young people that have come out of foster care, how are we helping them to develop their own relational matrices, in community, when our communities have been so impacted by colonization? So that's really like the core passion of my work. Like why I'm doing what I'm doing is because I really see the need for those safe spaces and the containers for those relational pieces to happen again. And I see that as one of the biggest ways that we can decolonize, because in community pre-contact, that was our whole space. That was our whole world. Yeah. Right?
The whole community
was the container. Yeah, it was a safe space. Like a lot of people don't know, but our law was very strict where I'm from. And if you harmed a woman or a child, it was like you were out of there right away, or you were, it was harsh. There was no room for that in our communities because we relied so deeply on the gifts of each individual. So I think a lot of those things really came to our communities from when Western culture was introduced. And there's some publications about it. I'll have to look up in my research, but it's that's been pretty illuminating to see how our ability to relate was disrupted in that way too, right? That our children and our women were considered so sacred pre-contact, and that fear was never really present, whereas now that fear is very real, and unfortunately it's in a lot of our ceremonial communities now, a lot of our traditional communities. That patriarchal power structure has made its way there too, and affects our children and our women in those spaces too. So I'm really passionate about kind of unpacking that.
Yeah, for sure. I think just kind of circling back to what you were saying earlier, all this work has to start with working with yourself, right? This trauma work, 100%. And I think that particularly as we're talking, as time goes on, right, those spaces, it's just like a natural progression of community, right? Is that those spaces, that were once perhaps, I don't want to say isolated, but like kept apart from a lot of that. A lot of those Western influences are kind of, they're finally reaching those more traditional spaces that you're talking about, those sacred ceremonies. Just because that's the reality. The time goes on, right? That people, that it becomes more and more prominent. And I think that,
for sure.
you know, we need to be really vigilant, both individually and as a community, that everyone is engaging in that work to make sure that
Yes.
those spaces stay safe. Right?
Thank you for saying that, because it can't be the work of a few.
No, no,
Because
no.
it's dangerous too,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, of course.
Unpacking this stuff can be dangerous, especially for women.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've really noticed. And but it's been so incredibly healing to unpack like those structures in our ceremonial communities.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like the way that we are still influenced in those spaces by like church and residential school.
Yeah.
And the way that if we look pre-contact, like how the power structures were. So where I'm from, the chief was really a spokesperson.
Yeah.
And he couldn't say anything without the agreement of our clan mothers.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just goes to show you how powerful like our women are regarded. And I see now in a lot of ceremonial communities this shift to that more Western style of like the man on top and the man holding all the power.
And even just like that concept of individualized leadership. Right?
Yes, exactly.
You know what I mean?
And not like accountability processes or structures that involve everyone.
Yeah.
And I also see a lot of women being silent. So when they bring up their concerns, they're immediately squashed because it's like, we're not talking about that.
Yeah.
But that's upholding that structure.
Yeah. For sure.
So it's really sensitive, I would say, like
Yeah.
unpacking that stuff. But how healing is that? Like even just for the women I work with to unpack, wow, we're being really affected by this.
Yeah.
And it's even in the places that we think are safe, and how we can keep ourselves safe and how we can support each other, you know, as we do that work. So, and yeah, and I think, like I'm almost to the point now where I want to like bring my mentors into these spaces and be like, say to them what you just said to me, because it's like so powerful.
Yeah.
And I think that too, men are almost more affected by patriarchy in some ways, because we're taught that our roles are dismantled, right? And our strength is dismantled, and it becomes insecure. So vying for places of power is like a Western influence for sure.
Yeah.
And it's a way to feel like we have that role, but it's not real. It's not grounded or authentic in our traditional value system. So, and I think as women, we've always had that ability to connect to each other and to be emotional with each other. Whereas colonization taught our men you can't feel, that you have to be this stoic, strong person. And so in that way, I think that patriarchal structures definitely do privilege certain people, but I don't think it's good for anyone. I don't think it's good for anyone.
No, of course not.
You know?
We can look at the laundry list of negative health outcomes for people, for men in particular, just due to toxic masculinity.
Wow.
The inability to communicate and to interface effectively and healthy is it's felt like from the time that you're very small.
Definitely.
You know, and then how that kind of. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think that a lot of the times we can kind of get sidetracked into forgetting that the community as a whole. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that, you know, while every member of our community is affected by this, and I'm glad that you brought it up and put it in that way. It's just that everyone is affected. It's just different for everybody.
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I wanted to circle back to something you said earlier too, because again, Harley coming into the conversation again, but he had a great quote, and I don't remember the specifics, but there was he met somebody that was a leader once, and the leader of the community was being pressured into making a decision for external influences, and he said, well, why can't you just make this decision? And the leader said, well, if I just made a decision, then I wouldn't be a leader anymore. Wow. Do you know what I mean?
That's amazing.
And for me, like when we were having that conversation, it was so powerful, right? Because how that's a fantastic example of what leaders are in our community.
For sure.
Spokespeople, just like you said, right? They're supposed to be supposed to be the voice. They don't make decisions. Do you know what I mean? They're voicing the wishes of the collective. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think there's a real special like indigenous leadership model that's there, right? Like I know like in a more religious context they call it servant leadership, where it's like you are serving the people that you're leading.
Yeah.
Right? But I think there's something parallel for indigenous folks.
Yeah.
That as leaders, you're only as healthy as your community. You're only as strong as your community.
Yeah.
So like having that as being our core value, as our core motivation to everything that we're doing is really important. That's really cool.
For sure.
Oh, did I skip one? No. So again, and just coming back to how diverse this looks, I think like we're here on a territory. My family's from Manitoba. The way our families can relate here, and I work in the urban center. So right now, where I work in Surrey, there's almost 15,000 Indigenous folks, all from different areas. And then we're on the territory of the Semiahmoo, the Kwantlen, Katzie, Kakite, Tsawwassen, and Coquitlam First Nations. So this is an interesting thing to navigate when we're talking about connection, right?
Yeah.
And how can we respectfully do that and create these spaces when we're coming from all over Turtle Island?
Yeah.
And we're on a territory that's unceded and was not legally taken from these people, right? So that's been an interesting way of navigating this work. And through creating community spaces in urban centers and bringing these folks together, I feel like our communities have the solutions. Like our young people and our elders, even the little children, they have answers about how they want their spaces to be for connecting to each other. And it's the job of us, like in organizations, and, to be able to really listen to that.
Yeah.
And one project I'm doing right now in Surrey is around Indigenous child and youth poverty, and it's just engaging with community and being like, what would you do? How would you make this the best place for an Indigenous child? Some of the answers that we're getting is just like mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And I think that's another way that we have been impacted, is to hear community voice, to really deeply hear community voice. Like we don't have those avenues anymore to be heard, I feel like, in a lot of ways, because, of so many different factors. Like we are working, we're raising these nuclear families, we're very isolated.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's a really interesting part of my work right now, is like, how can we be connecting with all of these folks that are living here? A lot of them have been displaced themselves from their own communities, or intergenerationally through being institutionalized.
Yeah.
How can we be reconnecting and creating community almost in urban centers?
Yeah. And
we need it. Like, I think people are really thirsty for it, but we don't know how to quite get there. So that's been a really interesting part of the work, and we're so fortunate to be able to have such amazing relationships with the nations whose land we're on, because they're under-resourced.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have the resources to be addressing every single request for protocol, right? So if we're talking about connecting to others, I think we really do need to look at how are we connecting to the territory that we're on in a respectful way. And as like funders, as government, I think they need to be looking at that too, because with all this stuff about reconciliation, are they really looking at how they can support nations to show up for that? Because they're saying we need to respect the nation, we need to do all these protocols, but I don't think people consider how much work that is. And
specialized work too, right?
Specialized work.
Bob Joe can't just do protocol. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So it means that people, those that are gifted with that knowledge and have the responsibility and the honor of keeping that knowledge in community get, overworked, and I've seen it.
It's true.
Time and time
and
again.
Even folks that are paid or are compensated for that work, they're overbooked.
Exactly.
Like you can't even.
They're just running around all day long. And a lot of the time, there are elders, right? And
yes.
And they need their time and their space. So how do we navigate that in a good way? It's tough.
Yeah, and tough. I think on a systemic level, we need to look at that more. Mm-hmm. We need to look at how we're supporting communities to be engaged with connection.
Yeah.
Because we want to acknowledge them in a really respectful way, and it's not. So how can we do that in a way that's tangibly supporting the community too, right?
Yeah.
Especially as organizations.
Yeah.
I'm like, what are we giving back?
Mm-hmm.
How can we give back to the nations whose land we're on?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm on a number of different committees that are looking at reconciliation and things like that, and they want to, maybe name a building or name a road. Mm-hmm. But I think we need to do better. I think we, in the name of reconciliation, which is still, that word makes me very uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure.
We need, that to me says, how can we tangibly connect and respect and give back to our host nations?
Yeah. I think it's obviously it's super important to recognize how far we've come, and these acts, even these conversations of reconciliation, yes, and naming buildings or naming streets or whatever it is, that that was not a possibility one generation back, right? No. Or even half a generation back. No. So I think as Indigenous people in this work, we always have to be cognizant and
that's
totally
true. For sure.
And totally remember that. But I hear what you're saying. These things they're fantastic. But how are they actually impacting the people and community? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're surface gestures almost. I don't want to say that as a
I know what you mean.
way,
Yeah.
But sure. They don't actually positively impact the lives of the people that make the community. Right. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Except perhaps for some emotional, I guess, for some people.
But I think you hit the nail on the head with the R word, is how does this positively impact the lives of the people here?
Yeah.
And that's what the question we need to be asking behind all of our reconciliation efforts. Totally. But I do think that there is value in having visibility for our culture in a positive way for our young people.
Of course, yeah.
And that's one thing that we've heard from young people, is that they don't see themselves reflected anywhere.
Yeah.
So in regards to connecting with people, I think that when we have more visibility of the positive aspects of our community and culture, not only does it help our young people to see themselves in a positive way, but I think it helps the whole community to see Indigenous folks in a positive way.
Yeah.
That would help with the relation.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Because all we're seeing on the news, a lot of the stories we see are around the trauma. Yeah. And the more negative aspects. So I think that paints us with a brush. Sure. And I also work with immigrant and refugee youth, and when we do our cultural competency training with them, they are so surprised that bias is inherited immediately upon arrival here.
Of course.
Around Indigenous folks.
Because what are they seeing other than the news? Do you know
But how subtle is it? I mean, sure, we see the news, but really overt misconceptions around, we all suck off the government, we're all, addicts and things like that. I'm like, that is so insidious. The way that bias just is woven into the fabric of our society. So I think that I love unpacking that stuff, not only for our young people, but for everyone too.
Yeah, for sure.
When we're talking about connecting to each other, and connecting authentically and respectfully.
For sure.
And then, of course, our personal relationships. This has been a really amazing journey to revive some of our traditional teachings around personal relationships. And I think there's a need for that. There's more of a need for education about healthy relating in relationships. What are the signs of abuse? What are the signs of a healthy relationship? How do we know? Because these things aren't really taught in school, and we're starting to see at younger and younger ages like really problematic ways of relating.
Yeah.
So what can we do to kind of reinstate our indigenous values at a young age around relationships, around consent, around things like that? So I would love to see more programs working with our really young folks, like grade 6, grade 7, around indigenous ways of knowing and being in relationship. Yeah,
for sure. I hold my hands up, and I really appreciate the work that is being done. I know that there are organizations, but I agree with you. There needs to be more, for sure. And I think that earlier, these conversations don't need to be so. They don't need to be so explicit at an early age, but just kind of reinforcing general messages and general values about how we relate, not just to our partners, but to our close friends and to all personal close relationships, right? And kind of what's healthy and what's not, because again, it all relates back to colonialism, right? And that and taking out that generation of our elders, that would probably usually do teach that in community, right? That would pass that knowledge on, and that would be healthy mentors for those relationships. That was gone, and now we're living in a time or in a generation where, that is still trying to recover, but it's going to take at least, it's going to take some time.
For sure, and we're living in a society where the Western values are the norm.
For sure.
So that's a really tough one. Right, especially in the face of social media and, even the gaming cultures and things like that. And I heard one of my friend's child was being bullied in grade 1 because he liked to play with the girls. And I'm just like, what message is that sending to our 6-year-olds? Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So how can we be addressing that, not only in an overt way, but, a subtle way too. To be like, you can relate to everyone. You can have friendships with everyone.
Yeah.
Because, I think that's something that we really need to keep a close eye on going forward. And I think you're right. It's going to be a huge job to repair that generational gap around relating. Yeah. And I feel like our generation is navigating that really,
for sure,
like right now.
Yeah,
and
it's very in your face.
It's very in your face.
Yeah.
But it's also really wonderful. Yeah. Because it needs to happen, right?
Yeah, it has to happen at some point, and I mean, if nothing else, happy for the generations to come, right? Because the work that we do now is only going to positively impact them in the long run. So.
Exactly. And I think when we talk about relating to others, we need to bring back that sense of responsibility, right? It's not about just us. This society really wants to normalize individuality and like every man for himself.
Yeah.
But we know from our culture, from our communities, that what we do is going to impact the next 7 generations. So I think keeping that in mind when we learn about healthy relationships, but also being really gentle with ourselves and like understanding that we are impacted every day by what's happened to our families.
Yeah, for sure.
I love this picture because I know here on the coast there's a big emphasis in clan systems, and where I'm from, we had a clan system that was dismantled, and we had a very large number of clans, and it related to kind of your job in the community.
Okay.
But I love the idea of revitalizing our clan system knowledge. Here on the coast, it's very strong, and it was kept underground, and I feel like it was saved because of that. But I think that's where we're going to find a lot of our traditional teachings about relating to others, is in our clan laws.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's something that really interests me. There's not a ton of resources about it where I'm from, but I think that it holds a lot of the key pieces around kinship. Yeah. And I love this picture because it's like kids from all over.
That's awesome.
So yeah, just again, I wanted to show this slide because, you know, we are so diverse, and our young people are diverse too, and they're coming together and they're creating a new way of knowing and being, I think, that we need to listen to, because I think a lot of our young people, you know, we're not all from the same place anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We're from very diverse places, and there's some really neat, like, media initiatives, programs that honor that and honor our ability to evolve our cultural practices. So I really love what Mike D'Angeli said to me one time. He's a Nishka artist. He said, no one has the right to delineate, devalue our cultural practices. In that, you know, when we call things traditional, it can be problematic because it keeps us in the past tense. But as Indigenous people, we've always innovated, and we've always evolved our cultural practices while remaining true to our protocols. So seeing now that's happening now with young people, with media, with art, is like so incredible and so amazing. And I'm wondering if there is a way that we can be innovative in those spaces for connecting to others, to creating community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. And I'm glad you kind of brought it up. I'm going to go slightly on a little bit of a tangent here, but I know that there are a lot of kind of, you know, like, misgivings about kind of utilizing traditional art practices to emulate contemporary imagery, and I totally understand that. I do, but I think we're kind of on the same page, is that to see traditional art styles being utilized in a contemporary fashion, or to represent contemporary icons, I think is a fantastic way for our youth to again come back to what we talked about, be engaged and feel represented.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? And see themselves being reflected in the wider world that I guess is, you know, the connected social media internet. You know what I mean? Like, I really applaud it, and I think it's fantastic. I support it wherever I can. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
I love it.
And there's people that come from long lines of artists that have the proper training and right and protocol. Like, I'm thinking about the Hunt family on the coast here. Dean Hunt, I can't remember his brother's name, but they do contemporary, like, form line. Cool. And it's really pushing boundaries, right? And it's really invigorating and inspirational. And also, like, with, I don't know if you've ever seen the work of Chief Ladybird. She does like kind of more Eastern style, but all around contemporary issues. Cool. And I love that. And so what I would really love to see is Indigenous art spaces in urban centers that can kind of mentor young people on how to express themselves through the arts. Right. Like that, you know, and really, because that's been a huge part of my healing journey, and it's also been how I center all of my work is through art-based practices, and that's why I joined IndigenEYEZ, because they're also doing community work through arts. Yeah. And I feel like it really takes down the barriers that we have about connecting to other people too, and being vulnerable, because we're taking these little risks, and it's like, no, you don't have to be an artist to do this stuff. You know, everyone can do it, but it's taking the risks and kind of revealing yourself again to community, and like not hiding. And I've seen that have absolutely transformational effects when we're doing our workshops. Yeah. Another big thing about connecting to others is, I think, thinking about how we're relating to the land. And thinking about how the land informed the way we connected at one time. Okay. So where I come from, we say that the land gave us everything. It gave us our sacred law, our language, our songs. And I feel like that's the same everywhere, because you look at like these different landscapes and traditional territories, and then you hear the songs of those nations, and they're very like, they seem really one and the same. Do you know what I mean? So like, we're horse people, and our songs are really fast. And then you go to like Bella Bella, where, you know, you're in a huge valley, and the songs are so slow and deep, and like it's so I feel like
It's a cool perspective.
Yeah, like having, I heard that actually from JB, the First Lady, who's New Hulk. She's a rapper here in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
And just honoring how the land really used to help us connect to each other. And I'm wondering how we can kind of return to that.
Yeah.
So having communities that can access land again. Because that's, I know for sure living like in an urban center, that's something I'm hearing from a lot of communities that they can't access nature. And natural spaces. So yeah, just trying to think like how we can kind of bring that back. And IndigenEYEZ does land-based camps that are incredible. And one of our founders also helped to develop the rediscovery model, which I'm a huge supporter of. So rediscovery, they have a camp up in Haida Gwaii. They have them all over now, but they take them to an old village site, the youth, and you live out on the land for a week learning traditional teachings and ways of relating, and that's been transformational for community. They even take adults out.
That's fantastic.
So I would love to see more programs like that our
sure.
urban kids can access, and even we can access, because I think that's a need for everyone.
Yeah, I think that I'm glad you touched on that as well. Getting back to the intersection of generational traumas and those gaps and stuff like that, I think that there are knowledge gaps in every generation at this point. Do you know what I mean? So these models of learning, I think, need to be accessible by every generation.
Definitely.
Do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
The youth is fantastic. Absolutely. Not saying that we don't need to focus there.
No, for sure.
But it also needs to happen because the youth can learn things, but if they come back to community and it isn't being reinforced or it isn't, you know what I mean, by the adults, you see that a lot. I'm pretty passionate about language, and you see that all the time, right? If the adults are not engaging in the language, then it's not around in the community, and it won't foster, it won't grow, even if you teach the kids.
Yeah.
But if it's a whole community thing, it's.
I love that. I love that perspective, and I know for me, like I've been fortunate to be able to go to different trainings and things like that for adults, and how formative it has been for me, but also for our elders.
Yeah.
Like I'd love to see programs just for elders to have like that wellness, that time to connect, because I feel like we're all healing, right? No matter where we are on the spectrum, and it's really going to impact, how our communities are going to be that safe container to connect.
Totally.
That's really cool. So these photos are by Hector Dennis, which is a youth in one of our programs who's absolutely inspirational. He lives in the Northwest Territories now.
Cool.
But I think that there's so much social anxiety now. You know, I think that's so prevalent in our communities. I know a lot of, like, the older generation of my family really isolate themselves, like, just stay home, just don't really connect, you know. So I think it does take a lot of courage to kind of step out of our comfort zone, but how rewarding it is in the end is, like, pretty profound. Yeah. For sure. And we call it, like, when we're doing our workshops, we call it scaffolding risk. It's a technical term, right? But creating, like, going out of, we have our comfort zone, we have our learning zone, and we have our crisis zone.
Okay.
So we want to be in that learning zone, you know, as much as we can. And too much learning zone, though, I got to go back in my comfort zone. Like, I'm doing 3 contracts right now that are all brand new things for me, and I'm like, I need to comfort out sometimes. But if we're, like, isolating, you know, just to have that courage to go out and do little things to connect is going to be really helpful in the long run, I think. So, like, my mom, I just love her. She's so cute. She's an introvert, so she recharges her batteries being home by herself, having alone time. But she's like, join the hiking club, and we'll go out like once a week, and you know, or she'll go out for dinner with her people. But just little things, you know, has helped her to really come back into community.
Yeah, for sure. And I like that, you know, even if you're introverted, because so are people that are introverted, absolutely. And I kind of, I'm the same way. I don't, there comes a time when I'm just, please just leave me alone.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But, you know, you can still access, you can still connect to others, you can still connect to community, even if you feel that way. It's just about pacing it and setting it for yourself. Do you know what I mean? It being self-driven and being self-paced. I think that's what's
and making time for it too, right? Like prioritizing it almost, because I think it affects our mental health. so deeply.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that not having those meaningful connections can really contribute to things like depression.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know that social media just exacerbates those things, so we have to be really careful, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, for me, this is a big one because even though I'm extroverted,
Mm-hmm.
I spend a lot of time in community for my work. It's still kind of freaky to like go out and do community stuff sometimes, you know. So, because I want to be in my comfort zone, but really prioritizing that and making time to bring my son out too, and expose him to healthy communities has been really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the sky's the limit. I love this. I love this slide from Hector. Just about like the possibilities too that are out there, and to really honor ourselves and to have that hope, you know, that we can heal individually and we can heal as communities too, and we can foster healthy connections, I think is really key, because sometimes it is really disheartening, you know, that we're working so much that we are isolated, but to know that there's other people out there that want to make this work happen too, I think is really important to acknowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And I love this photo from the canoe journeys up north, that metaphor of paddling together.
Yeah.
You know, we come back to this time and time again, that, you know, it's not only about us anymore, that we do have a responsibility to community, to, you know, foster lateral kindness, to model that. And I don't think it's even just about having a healthy relationship. I think it's part of a much bigger issue of decolonizing our communities. And so being able to commit to, you know, paddling my own paddle in a good way, to be able to pull my own weight in a good way, to be accountable, and to be contributing, I think is really important. And contributing can look different for everyone depending on our abilities, but just coming back to that sense of responsibility and accountability is really healing, I think.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah. I think there's tons of examples out there of people that kind of that get engaged in the community, that take responsibility within the community, big or small, in different arenas. It doesn't really matter, whatever you're doing, you know, like I use this example because it's something that I do, but like I really like soccer and I like sport and I like recreation. I'm not always the greatest with, you know, other things, but when I try to get out and connect to community here and contribute in the way that I can, and the way that I can, the knowledge that I have to share is through soccer and recreation.
That's awesome.
But in that way, I'm contributing by moving the canoe or the community forward.
For sure.
You know what I mean?
I'm
glad that you brought up that decolonizing aspect of it as well, because us taking full responsibility and moving our own canoe is, that to me, that's a big part of what decolonizing really is. Yeah. It's our community. It's our canoe. Do you know what I mean? So the only people that can move it forward is us.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? We're the only ones with a paddle.
And to have that pride too. Yeah. About it, and for that stewardship kind of mentality too, I think is really important. And to know that we need every paddler. Yeah. Right? We need everyone in community. We need each and every person. No matter how small your contributions are, because I feel like we're all born into community for a reason. That was one of our teachings back home, is that you know, we're kind of placed in the communities that we're placed in when we're born for a reason, and that we're meant to be there, and that we need every single person in our community. And when we're working in community, to acknowledge that too. That every single person that we come into contact with, that we work with, has a place in our community. And that sense of belonging is going to transform, you know, the ways that we relate and the ways that people can thrive.
For sure.
And just coming back to honoring each and every one of our own gifts, to be able to contribute back to community in whatever ways we can. And that's going to look different, right, for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
We're all on our own individual journey of healing, of dismantling some of these things, and then also nurturing our own sacred gift and what we were given. And so it's really interesting that this talk is about connecting to others, but I think it always comes back to the way we relate in ourselves and to,
Sure.
Nature and to the bigger spheres around us.
Yeah, almost as if it's an actual example of that circular model. Everything is interrelated, and you can't do work in one arena without doing it.
No, for sure.
Yeah, sure.
So that's about all I have today.
Awesome.
Do you have any questions or?
Well, we'll let the chat box. So now we'd like to welcome any questions. If you have any, make sure to put them in the chat box, and we'll address it kind of as we go forward. While we're waiting for that, I'd like to just say that this has been a fantastic fall season for us at the Learning Circle, and we've been really thankful for everything that you've all kind of brought to the circle in the chat box, and all of our guest presenters. The way that we've all kind of come together as a community to share this knowledge has been fantastic over the fall. So I really appreciate it. I know I speak for the rest of the Learning Circle team when I say that. It's been fantastic. We'll be back in the new year. We have a jam-packed session in the new year, so watch out for the MailChimp. We have at least 4 sessions, and then onwards into February. So we have many sessions. Yeah, so I think that I'll give it a few more minutes.
Awesome. I just want to say a shout out to Dale Jean and Anna Thomas. It's awesome. See you in the little chat box.
Right on. That's awesome. Yeah.
It's so cool how interactive it is.
Yeah, it's the best part of what we do, for sure. Yeah, so it looks like I think we might be okay for questions. If you think of anything, please feel free to email us. We'll pass those questions along. I'm sure Jessica wouldn't mind answering anything over email if anything comes up. Thanks so much to both of you for your discussion today. Thank you. Okay, so with that, I guess we'll sign off for the day. Thank you all very much for participating, and I look forward to seeing you in the new year. Have a great winter holiday. Bye-bye.
See you later.